Morning everyone, my name's Alan Cottom. I'm a solutions architect for Stonesoft, and this morning I've been asked to speak about cybersecurity, but not necessarily from the point of view that the products and the technologies that we provide, but more from the experience that we've gained over the years of deploying network and cybersecurity. And essentially, today's presentation is going to be in two parts. In part one, I'm going to try to sort of define cyber. I think we're all hearing the word cyber quite a lot these days. So what I want to do is try and put that into some context and sort of bring home the point of why we should be worried about cyber. And it's basically its overall influence on security. And in the second part of the presentation, I'm then going to look at why we need strategic frameworks to help and support our cybersecurity methodologies throughout the organization. Because without these strategic frameworks, then we're not going to be able to ensure safe enablement of the opportunities that are afforded to us by digital technologies. We'll just let these people sit down, Stephen, and we'll knock those lights off. In fact, go on. Okay. So hopefully you can see the screen a little bit better now. Before I begin, I'm pretty sure most of you will know who this is. For those that don't know, this is the new Q from the latest Bond film, Skyfall. Q obviously was a character made famous by the great Desmond Llewellyn, more for introducing things like bulletproof umbrellas or pens that fired laser beams. But this Q is a new quartermaster for a modern security service. And although the phrase that he delivered during the movie that's up there was probably delivered a little bit tongue-in-cheek and with a certain amount of license to exaggerate, the actual idea and thought behind that process actually holds true in today's connected world. So when it comes to what the topic that we want to cover today, I've placed a few words on the screen, and they're all pretty much words that we're familiar with. Anybody in the sort of network security, IT security arena, you'll all be familiar with these words on a day-to-day basis. And I think it's that sort of familiarity that means that we tend to start to take a little bit less note of those words, and they become a little bit innocuous. But just by the addition of one word to all of these, we can see how their meaning starts to change. All of a sudden, they become a little less innocuous. They become a little bit more, hang on a sec, I need to take note of this now. And it has a little bit more emphasis, even a little bit more coolness around it. And basically, we're all bombarded day by day by vendors and marketing campaigns, and the latest buzzwords come into these sorts of technologies. And it's difficult to sort of sift out the buzzwords from the actual serious topics and the serious threats that exist. And what I want to do with the first part of this presentation is actually, as I say, emphasize why cyber is important and what cyber means not only to you as individuals, but as societies, to organizations, even to nation states and militaries as well. So this is the whole concept. I threw Cybermen in there because that's my son's favorite Doctor Who character, and when he saw me with cyber on my screen, he said, right, you've got to put Cybermen in, so that's why they're in there. Plus the fact that most days I feel like a mindless automaton coming through the tube, so there we go. So when we're talking about cyber, what I want to do is separate the sort of two worlds that we have. First off, we have the physical world, a world of atoms. But then we have the man-made, the virtual, the digital world, a world of bits. And although they are two separate and distinct entities, more and more our reliance on technology and digitized technologies is becoming more and more increased, and also has a bigger impact on our physical world of atoms. And obviously, it's already starting as a trend, but over the coming years, this interaction between the physical and the virtual world is going to become even more greater. It's going to have more of an impact on our day-to-day lives. almost everything that we do, will be digitally interconnected, whether we know about it or not, whether we're aware of it or not. And the cyber domain will ever more expand and become more complex. So in order to get things right, we have to do it now. We have to start looking at the building blocks of our cyber infrastructures and put the little things right now so that as things become more complex and more difficult, it will be easy for us to build on our current defences and our current methodologies within the cyber arena. Cybercrime basically knows no boundaries. There's no physical boundaries, and as a result of this, its relative ease and simplicity attracts more criminals. It allows criminal organisations from the other side of the planet to evade detection, but also evade law enforcement. And our law enforcement have to work within tight jurisdictions, which makes it even more difficult for them to apply or attack or even capture the bad guys that are committing the cyber crime. But also, it's expensive, massively expensive. According to the European Union, the global cost of cybercrime now is estimated to be more than the international drug trade. So this problem isn't going to go away, it's only going to get larger and larger. We believe that cybersecurity is going to have the greatest impact on our understanding of overall security over the next couple of years. It's going to be the issue that will cause the strongest discussions, strongest changes, but ultimately change our understanding of security overall and the threats associated with it. Cybercrime is going to increasingly affect not only our sort of way of living, our way of doing business, it's going to affect the way our military forces operate. It's going to affect the way our governments operate and introduce new challenges with the capabilities that they have and need. It is going to be the strongest growing international security trend. I think that goes without saying. But it's also going to cause rapid growth in terms of political, economical, and even military impact as well. And I think it's kind of unfortunate. I mean, it's probably time to be a little bit serious now as well, because again, we're hearing about attacks day in, day out. But I think it is going to take, unfortunately, some form of, or the world needs some form of almost cyber catastrophe in order for the people in charge to actually sit up and take note of what's happening and actually put plans in place to protect ourselves, to make ourselves more ready for this catastrophe when it happens. So we believe that in the next couple of years, maybe 5 years' time, there will be a global catastrophe in the realm of cyber that's going to start to affect things like critical national infrastructures. It's going to affect things like global financial organisations. We hope, and I think we all hope as well, that our level of preparedness for this type of event will be adequate. I just hope it's going to be greater than our level of preparedness that it is now, than we have now, because I don't think we are that prepared. I mean, it only takes recent examples. Look at the attack on South Korea yesterday. We've already got nations blaming nations for cyber attacks. Yesterday, it was North Korea being blamed for the attack on South Korea. This morning, I saw links or reports that maybe it was China who was attacking South Korea yesterday. We're already seeing reports that Chinese hackers are trying to infiltrate US systems. And it is great, and obviously it's great that all these stories and reports are coming into the sort of public domain, but also I think it's leaving us with this kind of almost a false sense as well, because we're all being told that the bad guy over there is hacking our systems, they're hacking our governments, they're trying to get into our nation state or critical infrastructure platforms. I think we'd all be a little bit naive if we also didn't think that our own governments are doing the same things back. So cyber is always going to be, like with physical warfare, it's always going to be an arms race. One side is always going to try and better the other side. So it's great having a good cyber defense, but you should also have a good cyber offense as well to make sure you can counteract any other attacks coming through. Now, when speaking about cybersecurity or thinking about cybersecurity, we should also have a positive attitude. I think it's all too easy, especially from a security background and a network security background, it's all too easy to go on and focus in on the negatives. We think about how such an attack has just been released, how it's taken out so many systems. We don't think about the positive sides that these digital opportunities can offer us. But we have to hold on to those positive sides because, I mean, let's face it, you know, the internet has opened up a myriad of opportunities, not only for individuals, but also for businesses, governments, and so on. It's making our lives, our day-to-day lives, that little bit easier. Some would argue probably not, but in general, that's what's happening. So, if we think about the opportunities that a sort of a digitalized era has presented us, then what we also must think about is the level of vulnerability and risk that also is associated with those opportunities. Because it's great, yes, that we have these abilities, we can connect businesses to businesses, we can have live updates to our smartphones, we can have access our banking records online, but our current state of technological advance also has too many vulnerabilities and risks and threats associated with it. So we need to think about cyber from a more basic point of view, from a more basic understanding. Because global physical restrictions disappear. Cyberspace now is a 24-hour world. Although that allows us to do our businesses more effectively, it also allows the criminals and the bad guys, in inverted quotes, more access to our systems as well. But it's important to keep that positive mindset in there as well. So, I think relatively straightforward why everyone is talking about cybersecurity. It is the hot topic at the moment. And the reason for this is relatively simple. There is an increased dependence on digital resources. As I just said, our day-to-day lives have been transformed with the new world of bits. So that new offering of technologies obviously increases our demands, but also the sheer number of vulnerabilities also increased due to this. And again, this is because we're still living in a world where security is an afterthought. And that's the thinking that needs to change. Nation-level players and nation-level resources are being applied into cyber. Again, referring back to the recent news about the attacks in South Korea and so on. We're now seeing the cyber warfare plane taking over from physical warfare. If you think about it, it's no longer is it about how big my gun is or how many bombs I've got. It's all about how much brain power I have, how competent I am in front of a keyboard. Nations don't have to rely on massive physical strength anymore. They need the right people with the right mindsets and the right capabilities sat in front of a computer. And again, the weapon and counter-weapon arms race. Another reason. So we've heard recently that the United States have increased its budget in forming a cyber defense or a cyber offense force. Germany announced the same thing. Russia have done the same thing. The major players now in a cyber world are starting to up their game when it comes to cyber. It's no longer an afterthought, it's becoming the primary thought. And probably one of the largest reasons for the uptake in cyber is obviously its cost efficiency. It's far cheaper to have few people sat behind a keyboard than it is to deploy a force. So that's why one of the driving reasons that cybersecurity is going to be one of the biggest issues over the next few years. Now, my director of cybersecurity, he's also a doctor of military science. He's been in the military arena for some 20-odd years. And he spent the majority of that time doing research in cybersecurity, or not cybersecurity, but in security strategies, from a military point of view. But he's also done a lot of consultation on other nation states. He reads their strategy documents, their doctrines, and he wants to essentially make sure that I include these sides, because the military is always a good place to start when you want to start deploying defence and technologies in a civilian area. Because if you think about all of the great, or a lot of the great innovations have actually originated from a military point of view. Take the internet. The internet came from a military requirement. So all of these innovations that start in a military or a defensive force arena ultimately trickle through and arrive in the civilian era. So that kind of follows through, that the same strategies then that the military apply in defending nations, in defending their territories, those strategies should also apply within a cyber area as well. Because if we can apply the same thinking within the cybersecurity arena, then we can start to apply the same levels of protection and awareness for our day-to-day operations, our businesses, and even our individual lives. So as part of his research, as I say, he not only did sort of research in military strategy for his military that he was in, but also he's researched other nation states' doctrines as well. And the reason he did that was to see if he could find any sort of commonalities between all the various nation states in the way that they view the battlefield, basically either for today and for the future. And in short, the answer was yes, he did find commonalities. There are common features within all of those strategic documents that essentially are relevant to our approach to developing cyber defense strategies as well. So if we quickly just go through the points. Warfare is not only the responsibility of the military, but of society as a whole. That's probably true within the cyber world. It's not just the responsibility of your tech team. It's got to be the responsibility of everybody within your organization. And think of on a larger scale as well. It's not only the responsibility of our military to defend our nation, it's the responsibility of civilians. It's the responsibility of societies, individuals, to be vigilant and to be aware. So we can't just rely on one group of people to offer this level of protection for us. It's obviously important to have real-time situational awareness. It's no good having defences deployed if you can't keep a track of where they are and what they're doing, getting real-time information about their current states. Centralized command and control. Again, we need that level of centralized efficiency. It doesn't make sense to have people running off in different directions doing different things. There needs to be a centralized control point. But at the same time, we need to be agile and flexible enough so that if one portion of our defense becomes compromised, it can self-defend. It can look after itself. It shouldn't have to be totally reliant on the centralized command and control. Prepare for unknown threats. That's probably one of the most difficult ones, because if it's unknown, how can you prepare for it? The only real way you can prepare against unknown threats is by building in resilience. Because if you don't know what the threat is, at least for your critical systems, your critical assets, you need to make sure that they're resilient, either from backups or for resilient routes to get to them, whatever that might be. But that's the key there. And probably one of the most important ones on here is that resources shouldn't be wasted in situations that are not required. As a very broad example, for example, if an enemy force has deployed tanks, you're not going to deploy infantry to try and beat that. You're either going to deploy the same or you're going to deploy a greater firepower. So it's about putting the right resources at the right place at the right time. I think we're all pretty familiar with these sort of 4 domains of security. Again, whether it's from a military background or a national infrastructure background or whatever that might be. We're all familiar with the air, land, sea and space. Each one of them obviously has their own worries and concerns about applying security, but we've now got essentially what is the 5th domain, cyber. And cyber's probably the more critical one there, because cyber not only is a sort of separate entity, but it also overarches all of the other domains as well. There is so much reliance now within all of our areas on cyber. So cyber can no longer be an afterthought when it comes to building in security. And it's the same logic in business. Cyber is both a separate and an overriding sort of strategic domain when it comes to securing our businesses. In order to be credible in today's sort of cyber arena, whether that's as nation states, as militaries, as companies, or as individuals, you have to be credible in the cyber domain as well. And the last point I want to make on the sort of definition of cyber and why we do need to be worried about it. Today, it is possible basically to bypass an opponent's military altogether. We can render them irrelevant, we can make them look like a bystander, whilst a team of hackers go in and take out a nation's SCADA systems, or bring a banking infrastructure or grind a banking infrastructure to the halt. In the not too distant past, if you wanted to take a country's wealth, then essentially you would have to take their mines, their oil fields, their ports, whatever that might be. But to do that, you would have to rock up with a force, and you would have to fight their military physically. Today, with a large proportion of a state's wealth being in intellectual property or in financial systems, all you need to do now is suck out that well-established product from a company's computer system, or to impoverish a country, all you need to do is bring its banking system to a halt. It's important to understand who the targets are in the cyber world, because now the bad guys, the opponents, whoever they might be, are no longer going to target military defences. They're going to target a nation's organisations. They're going to target the companies within that organisation. They're going to try and bring critical infrastructures to a halt. And that's the way the new cyber warfare will evolve to. So that sort of concludes the first part of this presentation. And hopefully I've tried to put how we see cyber, how cyber affects us, again, not only from an individual point of view, but from a business and even a society and a state point of view. Now, I'm going to look at how we can develop cyber strategies. And the reason we need cyber strategies then is to enable the safe and sort of positive use of today's technological opportunities. I want to start off by thinking, essentially, what is security? Security boils down to these three things. It's the reality of actually where we are and how we are today. It's also a feeling. Did I lock my front door this morning when I left the house? Did I put the alarm on? Have I deployed the correct perimeter security on my network? But also, it's a model. The model tells us or helps us then define how do we protect ourselves, what processes do we need to follow, what competencies do we need, and also what technologies do we need to deploy. One way to feel secure is to close your eyes or even to bury your head in the sand. But eventually you're going to have to come out and face reality. So we need to take in a lot more in terms of how we want to interact with the digital world in order to make sure that the defences we have are appropriate. Our digital world of bits has become a domain where strategic advantage can be sort of won or lost. So the importance of a strategic understanding shouldn't be underestimated. Whether you are performing risk assessments, whether that be for your business, whether it be for critical infrastructures, whether it be from a military point of view, you tend to break it down into three main areas: the strategic level, the operational level, and the technical level. Tactical from a military point of view. But today, the focus is at this level, the technical level. Far too many organisations see the solution to cyber security being as a technical solution. They rely too much on security architects, security engineers, and network administrators to provide that level of fix. And because the emphasis is here, at the micro security level, we're not getting much guidance from the layers above, which means we're not really focusing the security on the best parts of the organisation or on the right parts of the organisation. We need to start here at the strategic level. only by receiving guidance from senior people within the organization on how they see the risk associated with connecting to a digital world, how they see the risk of what's going to happen if we start to offer a particular service, an e-commerce service, for example. What are the risks associated with putting our business on there against the potential loss to our organization, and not necessarily financial loss. We're talking about reputation loss as well. But it's only through that sort of top-down guidance that we're actually going to be able to effectively build a strategic framework to help us protect our digital assets. So, as part of a cyber strategy formulation, things that we need to start to look at. We've got our security model, remember, which is our reality, our feeling, and also the actual models that we want to implement within there. And obviously we've got our world of bits. But then when we decide how we want to interact with that world of bits, we need to start thinking about the opportunities and the risks. So the more opportunities we take, the more potential gain we have for our business or our organization. But the more gain we have, also that ties into the more risk that comes along with that gain. So if we're looking at the opportunities, we can identify what opportunities we have now, which is the insight into our business, into our competitors, for example. But we need to look into the future as well. We need to have the foresight to think, well, what new technologies are around the corner? How am I going to be able to better enable my business on the web or on the net? But to combat that, we need to start looking at the risks. And whether those risks are the known risks, fine. If it's known risks, we can start to put mitigation procedures in place. We can deploy the right types of security. We can make sure that the right people are there to fix that. But what's more important are the unknown risks. And remember, preparing for the unknown risks is a key part of a cyber security strategy. The way to prepare for unknown risks? To build resilience. It's the only really effective way. But what we're ultimately looking for here is kind of a line of strategic balance. Something that will mean that the risk of putting our business into the digital world doesn't outweigh the cost if suddenly we lose something like we have a data breach, a security breach, or we lose reputation somewhere. We then need to think about building two plans, an enablement plan and a security plan. Once our strategic thinking has been put into place, we need to think about operational. The operational now says, okay, we've listened to our directors, we've listened to the people that know about the business. We need now to implement some plans. We need to think about how can we best make use of the digital world in order to make our business profitable and efficient in this world of bits. Whether that's through looking at new business models and different business ecosystems, trying to gather efficiency gains out of either our existing technologies or looking at new technologies. But also, we need to make sure that security is built in at this level. We can't deploy technologies and then think about security afterwards. It has to be at the beginning of the process. We need to make sure that we have situational awareness. We need to be able to identify at any part of the system, at any point of the system, 24/7 view of what's happening within our environments. Once we have those enablement plans and the security plan together, we can then move forwards and we can start to deploy our capabilities. We can put our business in that digital world. We can take better opportunities or make most of the opportunities that exist. And that then starts to focus on the people and the processes. So, do we have the right people in the right areas? Do they have the right skill set? The processes that have been developed, are they efficient? Do they work for us? Can they be managed effectively? But also the technologies that are in use. Are we relying too much on what the vendor world is telling us? This is the latest and greatest technology. It has all these shiny bells and whistles. Do I actually need all those shiny bells and whistles, or do I need a solid product that will give me effective security? and the structures and services that have been put in place. Again, talking about agility, the flexibility. Again, it's no good putting a system in place that if 2 weeks later a new threat vector approaches and that system is rendered useless because it's static. You can't make changes to it. It's not agile enough to be developed, to be changed or transformed into a way that might suit your particular needs at that time. Only by going through an effective cybersecurity strategy like that can your organization start to make better use of the technologies available. And usually, you know, this is not a quick process, it's not an easy process, and there'll be a lot of learning that goes on along the way. You'll never get it right first time. But at the end of this process, there are some typical outcomes. And it's no coincidence that those typical outcomes match to those military points that my director likes to push down me quite so often. So when we think about going through that cyber strategy review, we need to change the way of thinking, and that means take the focus off the technologies and the technical part. That needs to be addressed higher up in the organisation. You need to have a clear understanding of how your business wants to operate, how much loss it's prepared to take, and then start to put strategies and plans in from there. The real-time situational awareness. Great that we have all this technology at our disposal, but if we can't identify where new threats are coming from or where parts of the process is failing, it's absolutely useless. We need to be able to monitor in a real-time manner. We need to have centralized control purely because it's more efficient. But at the same time, we need to be flexible and agile. Remember, we can't rely on part of our organisation being cut off and not being able to defend itself. We need to have that agility to be able to control. Preparedness for unknown threats. Again, and I'll keep coming back to this, the only way we can prepare for unknown threats is to build in resilience to our networks, to our technologies, to our systems. There's no other way we can provide protection for unknown threats. And the key point from this one, that comes out of a strategy review like this, again, is make sure you have the right staff in the right places. You know, put the people with the right security skills in at the right places to monitor your security environments. Put the people with the right analytical skills in. It's great that we can have teams and teams of people that look after servers, but if they can't recognize simple, or not simple, but if they can't recognize key flags that might indicate an attack, then they're not really much use to you in terms of from a security point of view. And remember, what we need to keep in mind when we're thinking about the sort of threats of the future and the reality of the cyber world are the unknowns. We're always going to have unknowns, just like the black swans. Before they were discovered in Australia, nobody had a clue that a black swan existed. And a black swan essentially has three traits. First of all, it's an outlier. It's outside of the normal sort of understanding that we have today, but its impact tends to be massive. So therefore, coming back to preparing for the unknowns, if its impact is going to be massive, the only way we can defend against that is to actually build in resilience to all of our plans. And thirdly, we will, once we've had a type of black swan or an unknown event, we'll try to retrospectively, with hindsight, go back and find the reasons for it. We won't do that, but we'll try to make it human instinct to try and find those reasons and come up with an explanation for what's just happened. So you might think, why are Stonesoft talking to you today about this? Essentially, yes, we are a security vendor, but we've spent 23 years producing security products. But not only do we manufacture those products, we also help deploy those products. So we've also got 23 years of securing networks experience behind us in all of those areas. So not only do we provide the equipment, we can also make sure that we can offer the best practical advice and the best practice advice. We're also a technical innovator. just to mention part of our research that's just been done that you might have seen, if you've seen me do talks in other places, I do quite a lot of talks on advanced evasion techniques. The research that we did in advanced evasion techniques has brought about a whole new threat vector in terms of network security. And those advanced evasion techniques can be used to bypass pretty much any top security vendor's IPS, IDS or next generation firewall product. And it's talking about being prepared for the unknowns or investigating the unknowns. Up to about 6 years ago, nobody knew that advanced evasion techniques existed. They were there, they just weren't there from a common knowledge point of view. So that's why we feel confident in talking to people about this and making sure that they're getting the best level of advice when it comes to deploying these types of securities. And if I leave you with this, when we start to think about the future of security, the role of cyber security is crucial, it's vital. And what makes sort of working this area so interesting and so important is kind of not the latest malware or the latest firewall or IPS technologies or even the latest denial of service attacks. It's what we're seeing day by day lately in the news bulletins. It's the sort of global chess game that's going on in terms of cyber defenses. And ultimately, that global cyber chess game is only going to get more and more serious. So that's why we have to be prepared. Thanks, everyone.